Good evening, folks. Today we remember the legacy of basically a cultural icon of the 1980s, 1980s television, George Wendt, aka Norm from Cheers, who passed away yesterday. Um, the show lasted, the show Cheers lasted from 1982 to 1993. That's an amazing run for a television show. And it really was a television show that defined the 1980s because it was the first television show of that NBC lineup. Um, it was one of the first television shows of that NBC lineup. Not the first, because the first was The Cosby Show. Well, actually, no. No. Cheers was before The Cosby Show, so it probably was the first of that NBC lineup. People got to remember that in the 1980s, the sitcom media was basically dead. Um, you know, they figured there was no more juice left in the sitcom medium. It had all been exhausted by uh, Norman Lear's sitcoms of the 1970s. But then Cheers comes along, and Cheers revolutionizes uh, television by bringing that sitcom out. And you noticed that, hey, what's going on, David? I usually open up with, hey, everybody, it's me, Jay. But today I opened up with good evening because that was George Wendt's slogan on Cheers. As he would enter Sam Malone's bar, he would always say, good evening or good afternoon. And people would respond with, hello, Norm, or Norm. And they would yell his name out, with the exception of Diane, right? And another running gag he had several running gags on the show. The chemistry between his character and the character of John Ratzenberger, that John Ratzenberger played as Calvin, was tremendous. And uh, and that was another running gag of the show. Another running gag with regards to him was his tab. He would always run his tab up on the bar, and even when he didn't have money and he wasn't employed, for some reason he was always at the bar, and Sam always gave him beer, despite him not having any money. And his third running gag on the show had to do with his wife. His wife Vera was one of those characters, and they have them in several TV shows, where you hear about her but you never see her. Kind of like on the Nanny, you had a character like this. Fran's father, Morty. Uh, you would hear the character, and people would talk to the character, but you never saw that character. Norm's wife was exactly the same. He would talk a lot about her, but you never saw her. In one episode, you did see her, but they threw pie in her face, so you couldn't see the face. Just like Wilson from Home Improvement, right? Was one of those characters. But yeah, it was the longest running television show, one of the longest running television shows. 9 years is an impressive run for a TV show. I mean, 9 years is wow. And of course, the spin-offs. Frasier was a spin-off of Cheers. So uh, that was a huge accomplishment. Let's go into a little bit of his biography. He was born George Robert Wendt Jr. in the Beverly area of the South Side of Chicago. His parents were Loretta Mary Howard and George Robert Wendt Sr. He was of German and Irish descent, his father's side, his George Senior's father's side was from Danzig, while Loretta's family was from County Mayo. All four parents were born in Cook County, Illinois. Wendt was an uncle and actor of former Saturday Night Live writer Jason Sudeikis and his sister Catherine. Um, he started in Chicago, of course, very similar to the Norm character. Norman's character had moved from Chicago to Boston, and was a huge fan of Boston sports teams. So when we talked about the skit when the Pope got elected, Pope uh, the new Pope, right? We talked. His name briefly escaped me. Sorry. Um, Pope Leo the 14th. There you go. Pope Leo the 14th. We did the skit, the Bears, the Bulls, the Bears, the Bulls, the Bears, about Chicago sports fans. And when George Wendt appeared on Saturday Night Live, he was part of those skits because he was a Second City native. He was a native of Chicago, and like many famous comedians, um, Chicago was a hub in the late 1970s, early 1980s for comedy. Chris Farley came out of that. Bill Maher was not from Chicago, but he did Cincinnati. John Belushi, of course, many comedians from that era that broke out in that era were doing comedy in Second City. Most of the early cast of the 1970s version of Saturday Night Live were part of that. He hosted Saturday Night Live in 1988 alongside Francis Ford Coppola as well. Like I said, he was part of the Superfans. Mike Myers, Robert Schmeigel, and Joe uh, Man- Mantegina. We referenced that. He was in the 1992 for a movie Forever Young, which I remember. I love that film. Forever Young is probably one of my favorite films ever by Mel Gibson and Jamie Lee Curtis and Elijah Wood. I love that film. Like I always say, I've always been a kid that was obsessed with the past, and that movie epitomizes it. I imagine what it would be like to be Mel Gibson's character, to be chronogenically frozen in the 1950s and then wake up in the 1990s. So he was in that, and he had his own show, a radio-based show on NPR as well. He appeared on episodes of Family Guy and The Simpsons and Frasier, of course. Frasier did a review of uh, a reunion of Cheers called Cheerful Goodbyes. He also appears on one episode of Seinfeld. But I just saw this. I just saw um, this morning, which again made a lot of sense because if it were not for Cheers, Seinfeld might have not existed. Because again, NBC was not only was sitcoms on their ass in the late 70s, early 80s, but NBC was on its ass. But NBC, by the time the 90s rolled around and Seinfeld had been established, NBC became this monster network with its must-see lineup on Thursdays, right? And he, of course, was a part of that. He also worked on Broadway, right? He appeared on NBC's Sabrina the Teenage Witch in 2001 as the title character's boss. The Larry Saunders Show, which was with Gary Chandling, was also he appeared on the. I love that show from the HBO. I didn't ever watch the HBO version, but I would watch the reruns when they came on Comedy Central in the in the 90s. The thing I remember most from him, honestly, is playing the father of Macaulay Culkin in the black and white video. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of Michael Jackson, and the black and white era, that was my era. Um, By that time, it was 1991. I was old. I was 6 years old. I was old enough to understand who Michael Jackson was, and I remember when that video came out on all the networks. It was a huge event when a Michael Jackson video came out and Michael Jackson video uh, premiered. It was a huge event. Everybody watched it. Like we all sat down and we watched that shit. And George Wendt was the father on that. Macaulay Culkin's playing the song. He's playing the loud rock and roll. And George Wendt as the dad, shut that off or turn it down or whatever he said to him, right? And then he cranks it up, and the father gets even more mad. And then and you see like the whole house explode, and then Michael Jackson starts singing. Um, cool stuff. He married Bernadette Brinkett, which eventually, when they do show his wife on the show, they eventually show Bernadette Brinkett on there. So that was his real life wife. He died in his sleep at home. Many people mourned him. People that were involved with his career, his lifelong television partners like Rhea Perlman, Ted Danson, Kelsey Grammer. The usual suspects that worked with him over the years. Um, rest in peace to him and condolences to his family. I mean, he was one of those guys that honestly, like, he was in a lot of stuff, but you never realize how much stuff he was in until you sit back and think like, damn, he was in a lot of he did a lot of cameos. But by far, Norm from Cheers is his most iconic role, because when you think of the bar, when you think of Sam Malone's bar, you always you don't think even you might not even think of Kirstie Alley, you might not think of Shelley Long, you might not think of Ted Danson or Rhea Perlman or um, any of those characters, but him's character is to me, the most identifiable character on the show. Oh, my mistake. It didn't last for 9 seasons. It went for 11 seasons. I don't know where they're getting 11 seasons here. But yeah, 11 seasons. My bad. I thought it ended earlier than 93, but yeah, this is right. 11 seasons. So yeah, 11 seasons is hugely impressive for any television show, and it never really got stale. Never got stale. So we want to go where people know, where everybody knows your name, where they're always glad you came. Cheers to you, Norman, and rest in peace. Good sir.